So what I'm going to be talking about today is Schema and my name is Ali Boyce. So the first thing is we're going to be talking about is schema and the learner. So how the learner processes these schemas and how it can improve an educator kind of talking about it. But this is basically talking about the thought process of a certain schema. So in order to talk about how one can encode schema, we first have to talk about what is schema. And schema is a philosophical theory that got implemented after Piaget's theory. So after this, I'm not, it kind of, um, it was kind of around the same time period as that and a little bit after. So, schema is a philosophical theory that can explain how knowledge and memory get implemented, and this is visually. So, for instance, this theory argues that the learner takes things to mind through singular knowledge structures called schemas. And then the mind does this by encoding certain visual events or objects in order for quick retrieval. And by knowing what schemas are, educators can have a greater understanding on how students can take in information and how to cater to their students. And really, by understanding how the brain works, educators can be a lot more attentive to the needs of their students. And knowledge and memory is especially important because students are learning things every day, and educators need to understand how the mind works in order for students to learn effectively. So, first, we are going to be talking about the two forms of schema. So, this can help kind of put in the mental picture of a schema. And so, the first one is objects. So this would be like a dog, a building, like a stop sign, and things that like make up the event schema, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit. So this type of schema takes in visual information, which is what both are, but these are quite smaller than the event schema. And so in order for that person to retrieve a mental picture, so if I say picture a stop sign, you would probably be thinking of a bright red sign that says stop. It would probably be on the road somewhere. And you would picture like a pole and it would be really on top of you. So I bet that vision is really, really clear in your mind because I know it's clear in mine because it's bright red and then drivers have to be aware of that in order to stop. So an event schema is called a script and it can act as a mental representation for an occasion like a restaurant or work, or my example that I'm going to be using is a birthday party. So first we have to think about what objects make up that schema. So if I said think of a birthday party, you'd probably be thinking about a birthday cake. I'm thinking of a pink birthday cake right now. You'd probably have streamers, lots and lots of presents, a party hat on the person that you're celebrating. Just a lot of things that you would be that come to mind on that. So the objects kind of make up the script, and then the script itself is the schema. I don't know if that makes sense, but I love thinking about little examples, and so I picture a lot of schemas on a day-to-day life, and understanding this has been really fascinating. And so there are four functions of schema. First is categorizing. So schema can help organize the mind, um, can help the mind organize the memory capacity in an easily accessible way. So if I said, think of an office party, it would come right to your mind right away instead of having to sort through all these junk memories in order to create a design. And so the second thing is remembering and comprehending, and then schemata can approve the time in which it takes for the brain to retrieve a memory. So, like I said, that stop sign that you had to picture earlier, it probably came right to your mind instead of you thinking about it for a while. And then comprehending is third, which is by forming a mental representation of a memory through schemata, the brains can make connections. So you'd be like, okay, a birthday cake would most likely be at a birthday party, but it's not the same thing as a wedding cake because the wedding cake would be at a wedding. And then problem solving is by observing and memorizing an event through schemata, the learner can use memory in order to solve a problem. So if you don't get the full picture of what the schema is, then you can kind of fill in the gaps. So if I said picture a restaurant, we'd be both picturing different things, but we can kind of like sort out what a restaurant would look like. So it'd have waiters, waitresses. If you're thinking of a fast food restaurant, it would definitely have like certain foods that would be served. But using problem solving in order to solve something, schemas can definitely be used in that. And so the next thing is the process of schema. So first, the brain selects a memory. And so the learner processes the memory and then the most important parts of them get stored. So it's more precise than the next one, which is just extraction. And then once the information is processed, the learner replaces the exact details and then they're replaced by the gist of an extraction. So it's like instead of talking all about frogs and the genus and species, they'd be like frogs look like this, they talk like this, and then well, sound like this, and you would get the most important picture of that. And then interpretation is next, which is when the gist is stored, the learner fills in the gaps by inferring using their context clues. And so you can think of the habitat of frogs, what they would look like, and so you could see, well, this animal is scaly and kind of bumpy, so it might be a toad. Well, this one is kind of green and slimy, so it must be a frog because you're using your context clues. And then most likely there are still errors in the information stored in the schema. And so to correct this, the learner edits their previous memory by creating a more accurate representation of that. So schemas are always being edited and going back to, and this is really important for the educator to start with the most, like with a broad overview first and then go into details because you can't really add to a schema that's not there. So next is the role of the educator. And so, how should teachers use the information that we have just learned? And so, by understanding the psychological concept of schemas, the teachers can create a concept in a way that is easily applicable to the student. So, we have already learned that it is much easier to add on to a schema than create a new schema. So we want to go with the most broad overview of information before we start adding like into the details because the students are going to get more mixed up and it's most easy to just go with the easily digestible and then go on to the more complex information. And then it's also great by using real life word problems into a math lesson because the students can take their previous schemas and kind of problem solve their way through that math lesson because they're actually visually interpreting their schema, which is really, really great, which makes it much easier. I know I'm not a math person, but word problems I was really good at because I have such a visual mind that I do really well with, and I feel like a lot of students are like that. And so, the end, and these are my sites.